Montana Territory. Late spring of 1877, the wind rolled low across the high plains, stirring dust and wild wheat as a lone rider approached the edge of Dry Creek. Mabel Clarke stood at the back of her father's shuttered mercantile, sleeves rolled to her elbows, arms elbow-deep in soapy water as she washed the last plate from breakfast. Her brown hair was pulled back tight, not for vanity but to keep it out of her way. She wore a plain calico dress, faded from too many washings, and her hands were red from lye soap and cold water. Her father had passed the winter before, and since then, folks mostly kept their eyes down when they passed her in town. Some said she was too plain, too quiet, too old at 24 to ever catch a man's eye. She had stopped caring what they said. Mostly. Until that morning when the cowboy rode into town. He came from the south, dust-covered hat, sun-tanned face, and a rifle slung easy across his saddle. He was not loud or flashy like the ranch hands who came into town looking to stir up trouble. He rode slow, like he had nowhere to be, but not a single wasted movement. He stopped in front of the mercantile, dismounted, and tied his horse with quiet care. Mabel watched from the doorway, drying her hands on her apron. "Excuse me," the man said, taking off his hat. "Is there a place around here to water a horse?" She nodded toward the trough. "You can use the one out front. My father built it last year, still holds water." The man smiled. It was a small thing, but it settled warm in her chest. "Much obliged," he said, then glanced up at the sign above the door. "Clarke's Mercantile. You Mr. Clarke's daughter?" "I was," she said. "He passed in December." "I'm sorry," he said gently. "That was a hard winter." She nodded. "You passing through?" "Name's Merritt Pike," he said. "Looking for work, maybe settle somewhere quiet. I heard this town might have need of a good hand." Mabel hesitated. "You might find something at the Dunley Ranch. They lost 2 men last month to fever." "They're always hiring." Merritt nodded, but his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than they needed to. "Thank you, Miss Clarke." She looked away, flustered, and stepped back inside. That evening she went to the well behind the mercantile to draw water and found him there again, washing the dust from his face. "I got the job," he said, water dripping from his jaw. She raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" "They asked if I could ride, shoot, mend fence, and keep quiet. I said yes to all 4. Mabel smiled before she could stop herself. He stayed. Over the next few days, Merritt came into the store for nails, tobacco, flour, and coffee. He always said thank you. He always asked how her day was. He always looked at her like he saw more than what others did. And then came the child. It was a Wednesday when she heard the knock. Mabel opened the door to find a little girl, no more than 6, standing barefoot with a ragged doll in her arms and a blood-stained note pinned to her dress. "Please keep her safe. Her name is Violet." Mabel took the girl in without hesitation. Violet did not speak for 2 days. She had bruises on her arms and dirt ground into her feet. Mabel gave her warm milk, a bath, and a soft bed. She sang to her at night, even though her voice was low and scratchy. The 3rd night, Violet curled against her and whispered, "Are you my mother now?" Mabel's throat tightened. "If you want me to be." It was Merritt who brought Violet a new doll made of corn husk and ribbon. He had carved the face himself, crude but kind. Violet clutched it tight and smiled for the first time. Mabel caught Merritt's eyes across the room. "Thank you," she said. He shrugged. "She looks happy with you, like she belongs." Mabel lowered her gaze. "I know I'm not much." "Folks say I'm too plain to." "Stop," Merritt said, his voice quiet but firm. She looked up. "You look like home," he said. Something cracked open in her chest then, something she had kept shut for years. She blinked fast and turned away, busying herself with the fire. The next week passed in a blur. Mabel found herself laughing more, her steps lighter. Merritt came by every evening now, sometimes with wildflowers, sometimes with bits of carved wood for Violet. He fixed the broken latch on her back door without asking. He swept the porch when she was busy cooking. And when Violet ran to him with scraped knees, he knelt and tended them like he had always been there. One night, after Violet had gone to sleep, Merritt stayed by the fire. Mabel handed him coffee. "You do not have to keep showing up," she said. "I want to," he said. "You do not owe me anything." "I know," he said softly, "but I want to be here." She sat beside him. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. "My mother died when I was 10, she said. "My father never remarried. I kept the store running because it was all I had left. Folks stopped seeing me after a while. I became part of the background." Merritt turned to her. "I see you." She looked into his eyes. "Why?" "Because you are steady, kind, strong without needing to shout it. You take in a child without question. You keep going even when it is hard." "That is not plain, that is rare," her breath caught. "I do not know how to be anything else." "You do not have to be anything else," he said. "I like you exactly as you are." She reached out, her fingers brushing his. He took her hand, warm and steady. Outside, the night deepened, but inside, something new had begun. They sat in silence, hands clasped, hearts steady. And in that quiet, Mabel Clarke began to believe that maybe she was not too plain to be loved. Maybe she had just been waiting for the right man to see her. And Merritt Pike. He had never looked at anyone else the way he looked at her. The creek behind the mercantile had swelled with melted snow, its waters moving faster than usual, but still clear enough to see the smooth stones at the bottom. Merritt crouched near the bank, working a whittling knife over a length of pine. Violet sat beside him, watching his hands move, her own fingers curled around a biscuit Mabel had wrapped in cloth. "You always make things?" she asked, chewing slowly. "Not always," Merritt said, not looking up. "Only when there's something worth making it for." She tilted her head. "What is it?" "A bird," he said. "For your windowsill, this pine's soft good for carving." Violet looked toward the mercantile where Mabel stood in the doorway, drying her hands on her skirt. Her eyes weren't on the carving. They were on Merritt. Later that afternoon, Mabel walked into town with Violet's hand in hers. She needed lamp oil, and young Joseph Grady kept a supply behind his livery since the general store had stopped ordering regular shipments. The walk was long, the sun had slipped behind a gauze of clouds, and wind tugged at her sleeves. Violet kicked stones as they walked, her silence comfortable now rather than guarded. They passed the schoolhouse, and Mabel slowed. "You want to go here someday?" she asked. Violet shrugged. "Will they let me?" "They will if I say so." Violet glanced up, uncertain. "What if they ask who I belong to?" "You belong to me," Mabel said. She didn't raise her voice, didn't make it grand. Just the truth, spoken plain. That night Merritt stayed for supper. Mabel set out cornbread, boiled potatoes, and a bit of venison she'd traded for. Violet curled up early on the small cot by the stove, her doll tucked under one arm. Mabel poured water into 2 tin cups and sat across from Merritt. "You from Texas?" she asked. He nodded. "Hill country. My folks ran cattle near Bandera. We had peach trees too. Wild ones along the fence line. You ever think of going back?" "No one left there now," he said. "My brother died in the war. Folks passed after. I went north looking for work and never saw a reason to turn around." She folded her hands in her lap. "You think this place could hold you?" He studied her face, the lamp casting soft light against her cheek. "I think it already does." She looked away, but not before he saw the way her mouth softened. "I never planned to raise a child," she said. "I don't know what I'm doing most days." "You're doing it," he said. "That's more than most would." She reached for the hem of her sleeve, twisting it between her fingers. "I thought I'd be alone, that maybe that was my shape in the world." "I don't see that," he said. I see a woman filling her days with purpose, a girl who's starting to trust again. A home with a roof that doesn't leak and bread that stays warm. Outside, wind pressed against the walls, but inside it was still. You don't talk like other men, Mabel said. I had to learn to listen, he said. Folks don't always say what they mean. But when you speak, I believe you. She stood then, not because she wanted distance, but because she needed movement to carry what he'd said. She crossed to the stove, stirred the embers, set another log on top. Merritt came to stand beside her, his hands empty, shoulders easy. "What are you afraid of?" he asked. "That I'll need you," she said, barely above a whisper. "And you'll leave." He didn't answer right away. He let the words settle before he reached out and touched her wrist just once. "I don't move on from things that matter," he said. Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time she let herself meet his gaze steady. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Neither do I," he said. "We'll learn." Violet stirred in her sleep, murmuring something that faded before it found shape. Mabel stepped away to tuck the quilt tighter around her. When she turned back, Merritt hadn't moved. He just stood there, hands at his sides, waiting. She crossed the room and set her hand against his chest. His heart beat solid beneath it. "You feel like you belong here," she said. He nodded. "So do you." She didn't kiss him that night, but she didn't have to. They stood close, the fire low, the room wrapped in quiet, and in that stillness something took root, deep and sure. Neither of them said another word. They didn't need to. 2 weeks passed before Mabel found herself walking with Merritt to the edge of the pasture behind the Dunley spread, where the cottonwoods grew tall along the creek. The Dunleys had offered her a pie in trade for 2 bolts of gingham, and she'd brought Violet with her, bundled in a shawl against the lingering chill that clung to the mornings. Merritt met them after chores, his shirt damp with sweat, collar unbuttoned. Violet ran ahead to chase grasshoppers, leaving Mabel and Merritt to walk slow beside the fence line. "You ever think about building your own place?" Mabel asked, not looking at him, just watching the way the grass bent under the wind. "Sometimes," he said. "But I'd need something worth building it for." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out and touched the fence post, rough with splinters. Her voice came quiet. "I've lived behind walls most of my life, first the store, then the silence after my father passed. I don't know much about building anything new." Merritt leaned against the next post, his eyes on the horizon. "Walls keep things out, but they also keep things in. Sometimes the hardest part is walking past them." Violet returned then, holding a feather. She handed it to Mabel, who brushed the dirt from it and tucked it behind the girl's ear. They walked back together, 3 abreast, with the sun warming their backs. That evening, Mabel stepped out to the pump behind the store to rinse the dust from her hands. She found a small bundle resting on the stoop, coarse cloth tied with twine. Inside were 2 fresh eggs, a folded note in an unfamiliar hand, and a copper hair comb shaped like a sprig of sage. She stared at it, then looked toward the road. No one. The eggs were still warm. Inside, she set the bundle on the table and turned the note over. The writing was jagged, letters unsure, for the girl. "And for you, because you looked like you needed something fine." She folded the paper slowly, then opened the drawer where she kept the small box of keepsakes, her mother's thimble, a dried sprig of lavender, a button from her father's coat. She added the comb without a word. Later, once Violet was asleep, Merritt knocked on the door. He held a pot wrapped in cloth. "Brought stew," he said. "Mrs. Dunley made too much, and I told her I knew someone who'd take it." Mabel stepped aside to let him in. They sat at the table, bowls between them, the lantern casting long shadows. Mabel stirred her spoon through the broth. "Someone left a gift for Violet today," she said. "And for me." He didn't ask who. She glanced at him. "You think this town's changing?" Merritt took a slow bite before answering. I think some folks are. Others still squint at anything that doesn't fit square. I used to think if I just kept quiet, I'd be safe, that people wouldn't look too hard. And now I think I want to be seen, but only by the right eyes. He looked up then, and for the first time his expression held no guardedness. I see you, Mabel, he said. Not because I'm trying, because I can't help it. She reached across the table and set her fingers lightly over his. His hand turned, palm up, and closed around hers. My mother used to say some things take root slow, she said. And some things come up wild and sure, he added. They sat like that, the empty bowls forgotten, the air quiet but not still in the corner, the fire crackled low. Mabel leaned ever so slightly forward. I don't need grand promises, she said. Just someone who stays. Merritt's hand tightened around hers, his voice low. Then let me stay. Upstairs, Violet turned in her sleep, murmured something soft, and settled again. Mabel stood, moved around the table, and rested her head against Merritt's shoulder. He held her carefully, like she was something known and new both at once. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees, and spring stepped forward, quiet and certain. The first hard frost of the season hadn't yet come, but the air carried a new bite. Mabel stood behind the mercantile with her sleeves rolled down, watching Merritt hammer a hinge back into the cellar door. The iron had warped from years of weather, and now it caught every time she tried to pull it open. Merritt had brought a rasp and a pair of leather gloves and said nothing while he worked. Mr. Dyer offered to buy the store, she said after a while. Says he wants to turn it into a feed supply. Merritt didn't pause in his work. You think on it, I told him no. He glanced up, one brow raised. It's not much, she said, but it's mine. And Violet's grown used to the upstairs room. He nodded, then returned to the hinge. Good. She watched the quiet strength in his shoulders, the way he never moved in a rush. Something about him reminded her of the horses her father used to admire, not for beauty, but for their steadiness under weight. Merritt stood, brushing sawdust from his hands. I was thinking of building a shed out by the edge of town. Nothing fancy. Just enough to keep tools dry. She waited, sensing more. There's a man out near Shields River who mills cedar. Said he'd cut me a deal if I help him fell a few trees come Sunday. You'd go all the way out there, she asked. I'd bring it back here. Violet opened the back door then, holding a piece of folded paper. He gave me this, she said, handing it to Mabel. Said it was for your keeping. Mabel unfolded the page. A charcoal sketch of the mercantile drawn with care. The lines were simple, but the detail was unmistakable. Her porch chair, the sign above the door, even the flower pot she'd forgotten to water. He's good, Merritt said. You did this? She asked Violet. The girl shook her head. No, the man with the crooked hat. He said it was from when he passed through last spring, said he remembered it. Mabel looked closer. There was something about the angle of the building, the way the light had been captured in shadow. He must have drawn this from memory. Violet nodded. I told him to leave it for you. I think he wanted to. That night, after putting Violet to sleep, Mabel stepped out to the porch with a shawl wrapped around her. Merritt was already there, sitting on the steps, elbows resting on his knees. She's drawing again, Mabel said. Did you notice? I saw her with charcoal on her fingers yesterday. She used to just hold things. Now she makes things. Merritt shifted just enough to make room beside him. That's because she knows she's safe. Mabel sat, the wood cool beneath her skirt. It's strange. I thought I'd spend my life behind the counter, selling nails, counting beans. I never thought about more. Merritt looked over. What would more look like? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tucked her hands into her lap. A garden. A fence I built with someone else. A place where the girl doesn't flinch when someone raises their voice. maybe a table big enough for more than 3 chairs. He leaned back against the railing, his voice low. I've been thinking of asking Dunley to let me go come the new moon. The pay's fair, but it isn't what I want to keep doing. Mabel turned her head toward him. What would you do instead? Work with my hands, build, fix things that last, and stay close enough to see what takes root here. She didn't speak, but she reached out and laid her hand on his forearm. His skin was warm from the day's work, and he turned his arm so her hand could rest in his. I'm not a woman used to being chosen, she said. You're not a woman who needs to be, he replied. You already stand where others just drift. She looked at him fully, the porch lamp catching the quiet certainty in his face. I don't want promises, she said. I don't offer them, he said. I offer the next day. And the one after that. She leaned into him, just slightly, enough to feel the solidness of his shoulder against hers. They sat like that until the sky darkened and the stars blinked awake. Mabel didn't think about what others had said about her quiet ways, her plain face, her small life. None of it mattered now, because the man beside her had chosen to stay, and in the hush of that evening, with the warm weight of his hand in hers, she felt something settle into place like a stone finally finding its hollow, not loud, not grand, but home. By mid-autumn, the trees along the creek behind the mercantile had turned to gold, their leaves rustling like paper in the breeze. The days shortened, and with them came the first real stirrings of what Mabel had once thought unreachable ease and something like belonging. That morning she stood on the back porch, watching Violet crouch beside the woodpile, arranging bits of bark and pebbles into careful lines. Mabel's apron was dusted with flour, her hair pinned back with more care than usual. She hadn't planned to wear the blue dress, the one tucked away since her mother's passing, but something had pulled her to it. It hung a little looser now, worn smooth at the elbows, but it still held a shape that made her feel upright. Merritt arrived just after noon, his shoulders carrying a crate of cedar boards and a wrapped parcel under one arm. Violet ran to open the door before Mabel could reach it. Brought what I promised, he said, stepping inside. Enough wood to start that shelf you mentioned. Mabel reached for the parcel. What's this? He hesitated, then handed it over. Something for Violet and something for you. She opened it carefully. Inside was a small slate with a bit of chalk, and beneath that, a carved wooden box, sanded smooth and lined with scraps of calico. Violet opened the box and gasped. Nestled inside were bits of colored glass, sorted by shade. She looked up at Merritt, eyes wide, then threw her arms around his waist without a word. Mabel's voice was low. Where did you find these? Riverbed near the Shields' place, Merritt said. Took a while to rinse the silt off. She'll keep these forever, Mabel said, running her fingertips over the glass. I hope she might. Later, while Violet rested upstairs with her slate, Mabel and Merritt sat on the stoop beneath the cloud-thinned sky. He had taken off his coat, sleeves rolled as he sanded the edge of a board. The scent of cedar carried on the breeze. I've been thinking about that room behind the store, Mabel said, her hands folded in her lap. The one we used for stock. He glanced over. What about it? It wouldn't take much to clear it. Add a stove, a table, could be a proper place for someone to sleep. He set down the board. You asking? She didn't look at him. I'm offering. A long pause stretched between them. Then carefully, Merritt reached for her hand, his fingers rough with work but gentle where they met hers. I want to build something that stays, he said. Not just shelves and sheds, a life. With you. Mabel exhaled slowly, her shoulders loosening. I didn't think I'd ever be part of a life someone chose. You were never just part, you were the reason. She turned toward him fully, eyes meeting his. I don't need grand things, Merritt. I know, he said. I brought nails and boards. I didn't bring promises I can't keep. She smiled then, a quiet thing, and leaned in to kiss him. It wasn't rushed or uncertain, just two people who had been walking steadily toward each other for longer than they'd known. Winter came soft that year. The mercantile stayed warm with the new stove Merritt installed, and Violet took to waking early to draw pictures on her slate before breakfast. The shelf Merritt built held jars of dried apples and penny candy in small muslin bags. He slept in the room behind the store, but more often than not, Mabel found herself waking with his hand tucked over hers. In December, they were married under the cottonwoods, the last of the leaves fallen, the sky pale and still. Violet stood between them, holding both their hands. The preacher read the words plainly, and when Merritt kissed her, Mabel felt the ground beneath her feet shift, not in fear, but in quiet joy. They didn't leave town. There was no need. They had a home, a child, a store that still bore her father's name but now carried her hand in every corner. Merritt took on repairs around town, and folks began to nod when they passed her in the street, not out of politeness, but recognition. One evening in early spring, Mabel stood in the doorway of the mercantile, arms crossed as she watched Merritt and Violet plant seeds in the small patch of earth near the porch. The girl held a tin pail, dropping one seed at a time while Merritt showed her how to cover them with just enough soil. Mabel stepped down and joined them, kneeling beside the girl. "What are we planting?" she asked. "Beans," Violet said proudly, "and marigolds. He said flowers keep the bugs away." Mabel looked at Merritt. "Smart man," he grinned, brushing dirt from his hands. "I married a woman with more sense than I've got. Had to keep up somehow." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Violet giggled, tossing a fistful of soil into the air, and there it was, not the life Mabel had once imagined. Better. Built slow, held steady, and rooted deep in a love that asked nothing but honesty and offered everything in return. They stayed through each season, through lean years and good. Violet grew tall and sure, her drawings pinned to the walls of the mercantile right above the shelves Merritt built. Mabel kept the ledgers neat and the hearth warm. Merritt never left. He never once needed to be asked. And when the years turned their hair to silver and their hands to leathered maps, they still walked together each evening, past the creek, past the cottonwoods, into the hush of a life chosen and shared. They were never loud people, but their love spoke clear and strong in the quiet.